Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Ian, I'm Ian the Reader, and today I am back with my July wrap-up. So this is a little bit belated. I actually took last week off from making videos and filming videos just because I had a crazy week going on, and so I decided to take a little bit of time off, but I am back and ready to talk to you guys about all of the amazing books that I read in July. So if you haven't been watching my videos, then you may not know that I participated in the Indie Accords Readathon in July, and it was amazing. It was a time of focused reading in which a bunch of us readers just came together and we read self-published or indie books throughout the month of July, and I discovered so many amazing books, so many books that are now on my TBR, and so many books that I've already read and loved. It was just an amazing month, and I'm so glad that I chose to participate in the readathon. Also last month, I did introduce a new way of grading my books, or rating them rather than just the traditional like 5-star scale. It's still kind of translatable into the 5-star scale, but I use a letter system primarily. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about all 16 of the books that I finished in July, and how we're going to do this is we're going to talk about them from the books I rated C, then B, and then A. I didn't have any D or F books this month, which is great. So that kind of could translate to like 3 and 4 and 5 stars. Now for each individual book, I do have like C- or C+ or just a C and all that jazz. You know how this works. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about all these books today. Before we jump into that though, it would mean so much to me if you would like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Going forward, I'm going to be posting videos 2 times a week after this week, just because I'm actually starting grad school up again next week, and so my schedule is going to be a little bit crazy, but I will definitely be getting a lot of content out to you guys soon. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the books that got a C score from me in the month of July. So for July, I had 3 books that made it into the C category. I actually had 4 originally, but as I was thinking about it more, and I went through my kind of like rating system and the way that I calculate that, I decided to move 1 up from a C+ to a B-, which we'll talk about that later. But the first book that I wanted to talk to you guys about today was a book that I did read for the Indie Accords. This was to complete the challenge, read a diverse book, and the book that I read was Moon Over the Crusted Snow, or Moon of the Crusted Snow. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's right here. It has a beautiful cover, and I'd heard a lot of really great things about it, so I did decide to pick it up. It is published by an indie publisher, so I was really excited to find out that I could read it for this readathon, and unfortunately this book really did fall flat for me. So this is a, not dystopian, it's like a post-apocalyptic kind of story where everything starts out normally, but very quickly in the story, all electricity and like communication via like telephones and internet and things like that are shut down. They just all of a sudden stop working in the entire community. They're not sure if it's the whole world, but at least in the surrounding area, there is no communication whatsoever, and there's no electricity whatsoever, and chaos ensues, obviously. This is not really a plot-heavy story. It more deals with the themes of tradition versus modernism and how those things collide, and how the traditions of older generations change with new generations that come, and whether or not those traditions can really be sustained and live on as things change. And that theme is very prevalent in the book, and I did appreciate that. Unfortunately though, I just did not connect with the story at all. So like I said, the plot really isn't the focus of this story, despite the fact that it's like a post-apocalyptic story. You'd think that the plot would be a heavier aspect of it, and it went to a certain extent into that, but I thought that it could have gone so much farther. I think this book really could have been longer, and it would have benefited from that. I do think that the author told the story that he wanted to tell, but unfortunately it just did not really work for me. And then on top of that, the writing is writing that really I had a hard time connecting to. It was very distant from the reader, and I understand that that may have been on purpose. But on top of that, it made me distanced from the characters. You know, I really didn't connect to our protagonist or his family. I felt for them just because of the situations they were in, but I felt for them in the same way I would feel for anybody in that situation, not because I knew a lot about them and cared a lot about them. So ultimately this did fall flat for me, and it did get a C-. So glad that I read it though. So the next 2 books that I'm going to be talking about are books that I was actually really excited to be reading because they are both by some of my favorite authors, and so I thought that they would be higher up on my scale for July, but unfortunately that was not the case. And so the first of those is Joyland by Stephen King. So this is a book that I have been meaning to get to for a while, because a few people that I follow on Instagram have this like really high up on their favorites list from Stephen King, and so I had pretty high expectations going into it, I won't lie. Unfortunately, I just felt that it didn't really pay off on the setup. So it's kind of like, the story is you have this young man who is just turning 18, and he's working at this theme park, and it's like a haunted theme park. There was a murder there at some point, and supposedly it's like haunted. Unfortunately, that is kind of put on the back burner and not really at the focus of the story. It's definitely like more of a coming of age story, but I don't think that this is by any means Stephen King's best coming of age story. He has so many books that feature like that coming of age trope, and he does it so well, and so for him to do it not as well in this book was really disappointing. On top of that, I feel like it is kind of pitched as being like a horror book, but really the horror aspects of it are really slight and aren't really present. Like I said, it really does focus on the coming of age story, and there's also this kind of like sad story aspect of it that's kind of introduced halfway into it, and that just really didn't work for me either. And so this book was not bad by any means, but it is nowhere near my favorite Stephen King book, and ultimately I just felt really let down by this one. Joyland by Stephen King gets a C. Next up, we have The Law by Jim Butcher. So this is a novella that comes in between books 17 and 18, I believe, of the Dresden Files. We have the first 17 books, and this is a short novella. I think it was like 3.5 or 4 hours on audio, and it comes in between this most recently published book and the one that will be coming out God knows when. And I was excited because a lot of things happened in book 17, Battleground, that I wanted to see some payoff for. Not necessarily like physically, but emotionally. And this definitely felt in some ways like a smaller Dresden Files story that I did enjoy ultimately, because, you know, it felt a little bit more reminiscent of Dresden of old, where as the series progresses, the plots get a lot bigger and the world gets bigger and the stakes really rise a lot. And I really enjoy that, but this felt like small stakes, kind of back to his roots of being like a private detective, going about searching through and investigating this mystery. And I liked that. Unfortunately though, like I said, there were a lot of things that I wanted to be explored in this book, and I think that Butcher did do that, but not enough. You know, I think he kind of tapped onto it, and maybe it'll be led into a little bit more, or like gone into a little bit more in the next book. But unfortunately, he kind of went through some stuff that I felt should have been in a novel, if that makes sense. Like, it should have been longer, and it felt like some of the emotional beats that would come in the next full installment were present in this book, but not at all to the extent that I expected. And then on top of that, ultimately, I just found the actual story and the mystery to be really forgettable. Like, I read this a month ago maybe, and I already can't remember what the mystery was about, or who did what, or what happened, and that says a lot, to be honest. So I enjoyed being back with some of my favorite characters. We get, you know, obviously Harry, but we get a few of the other side characters that I really do love. But we just didn't get enough time with them for me to care that much. The mystery didn't really stick with me at all, and I just expected more from this emotionally. At the time of finishing it, I gave it 4 stars because I was still on my old rating scale, which would equate to a B, but ultimately, I think that this deserves a lower score, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a C+. So that completes all the books that got a C from me. Now let's go ahead and jump into the B tier. First up is the book that, like I said before, had gotten a C+, but I did decide to move up to a B-, and that is Sorrow. So this is a book that I did not know about before jumping into the readathon that I participated in last month. It is an indie published book. I don't believe it's self-pub. I think it's from an indie publisher, but I hadn't heard of it. I was just doing some research. I wanted to read something a little bit more contemporary because a lot of the self-pub books that I did read this month were fantasy, and so I wanted something in a little bit of a different genre, and so that's what this was. Just to tell you a little bit of what Sorrow is about, this follows a man who has run away from his life. He had all of these things that he cared about. He cared about his musical career, he cared about some individuals in his life, but something happened before the book takes place that he has now left all of that behind, and he's just kind of living in seclusion with no emotional ties to anyone. And this is him going back and kind of reflecting on everything that happened in his life. And I really did enjoy it, to be honest. Like I said, I originally gave it a C+, and the reason I only gave it a C is because this book doesn't really do a whole lot that's original, and I'll say that. That was my biggest frustration with it, is that there was nothing about this book that I think like, wow, okay, this feels fresh, this feels new. Really, this felt like very familiar territory. It felt like it was ground that had been tread upon many times by other authors, but I will say that this author did do those normal and like expected things very well. So there wasn't really a lot that surprised me about this book, but it was well executed, and for that I do really appreciate it. I also did feel quite a bit of connection to some of these characters, and I liked the musical aspect of it. I will say it kind of felt like the author isn't a musician, and she was just kind of trying to like emulate the things that other people who are musicians might say or feel. And I think she definitely has a connection to art in general, but I don't really see the love for music there as much as I would have liked. So that was a little bit frustrating, but overall I did really have a good time with this. If you enjoy a contemporary book that has some very emotional moments, but also some great characters and great friendships in there, I really do think you might enjoy this book. Sorrow gets a B- from me. Next up, we have On Lavender Tides by Travis M. Riddle. So I've actually already reviewed this book on the channel. I'll go ahead and leave a link down below to my full review of On Lavender Tides. But this is a progression fantasy inspired by Pokemon, heavily inspired by Pokemon. It's basically Pokemon, but Travis M. Riddle's take on it. I had a lot of fun with this. I had some complaints for sure, but overall, the fun that I had with this book really outweighed the complaints that I had, and so I really did enjoy this book, and I cannot wait to pick up book 2 probably in August. I did put it on my August TBR, but that being said, with all the other books I have to get to, this might be pushed to September. The second book does come out in mid-September, I believe, so I would have a few weeks to read it there, but I really did enjoy On Lavender Tides. This gets a B- from me. Next up is a book that I had no intentions of getting to in July or really anytime soon, but it was on my radar. The book that I'm talking about is Finley Donovan is Killing It by El Casimano. I believe that's the author's name. The reason this book was on my radar is because Fina from Fina Reads and I did a TBR swap for the month of August, and I did pick Finley Donovan is Killing It for her to read from her TBR, and I just kept thinking about it, and I was working on the last day of July, and I needed something that was really easy to get into, that I could focus on while I was working, and Finley Donovan just came into my mind. I was like, you know what, why not? And I zoomed through this book. I listened to it in one go, and I had a blast. I really did. Finley Donovan is Killing It follows a single mother, newly single, she's freshly divorced, who is really struggling financially. She is a romance author, but she's like kind of trying to branch out into thriller as well. She is having lunch with her agent one day at a Panera Bread restaurant of all places, and she's talking to her agent about how she can't figure out how to kill one of her characters, and someone overhears it and thinks that she's a hit woman, and through a series of events, she ends up trying to hire Finley to kill her husband. And it's wild. It is a book that made me, I mean, you have to suspend your disbelief, but at the same time, it's just so lovable and believable in that way. It just feels very genuine, that I had a good time with this book, honestly. I think that I'll definitely come back to this series. The second book is already out, and the third book will be out early next year, and I can see this being a series that I pick up when I'm kind of in a slump or something like that, just because this is a really fun time. It was really funny. It was really, the pace was well done as well. It is not a book or type of series that I really would see myself picking up very often, but I had a really good time with it, and I'm really glad that I read Finley Donovan is Killing It. This gets a B from me. Next up, we have The Flaw in All Magic. So this was the first book, I believe, maybe the first or the second, I can't remember, that I read for the Indie Accords. This is a self-pub fantasy mystery detective story, and I loved this so much. So this follows a main character who does not actually have magic at all, but he has bamboozled his way into a magic university, and he became like their star student, and then he revealed that he had no magic, and so now he's a disgrace. But they've invited him back to help solve this murder because it's like an impossible murder, and people who use magic can't really tell what is going on with it because they are just used to magic, and so they need somebody who is an observer of magic but not a participant in magic to come and take a look at it. So they invite him back, and things go from there. I already have a review for this on my channel with the next book that I'm going to talk about, actually, but I'll go ahead and link that down below. You can get my full thoughts on it there. But I really did have a really great time with this book. I did have some minor flaws with it, but overall I just thought it was a really fun adventure story with good mystery and good magic, and just a world that I am interested to know more about. And so I do plan on picking up the second book. I believe this is a completed series, and I think it has 5 books, and I definitely plan on continuing it very soon. It is for people who love Dresden Files, but maybe want a little bit more of like a buddy cop story, and a little bit less of the male gaze aspect that Dresden is unfortunately known for, especially in the earlier books. So I really did enjoy this, and The Flaw in All Magic gets a B from me. But like I said, I did review that book with another novel, and that is Unsold, the first book in the Cradle series by Will White. I am so glad that I finally prioritized getting to this book. I had a blast with it. Really, this is just a good time. Like, it feels like you're eating popcorn. It's just action and fun progression fantasy, and I've only read the first book, but I heard it gets so much better. I did give this book a B, and I do anticipate that the future books are going to get a higher score from me, but ultimately I really had a fun time with Unsold, and I cannot wait to continue in the Cradle series. Next up, we have another entry in the Dresden Files series, which is Blood Rights. So this is kind of, in my opinion, like the last of the early Dresden books, because once you get to Deadbeat, like in my opinion, the first 6 books there are pretty good books, even some that are, considered good by me. But once you get to Deadbeat, which is book 7, it's just like banger after banger after banger. Books 7 through 17 are incredible. So I'm glad that I read Blood Rights. I had a good time with it. There are a lot of really big character moments for Dresden and for Murphy as well, and just some of the other characters. A lot of things happen in this book that are important to the overall series, but I am glad that I'm past this book so that I can get on to my reread of Deadbeat and all the books that come after it, because that is where the series really gets into the 5-star territory for me. So for me, book 6, Blood Rights and the Dresden Files, gets a B as well. All right, next we have my first B+, and it is In the Hills Above the Grist Mill by Calvin Ellis. So this is a book that, again, I read for the Indie Accords, and man, I had a good time with it. So I had been hearing about this book from a few other booktubers, and it was definitely on my radar, but I was not really prioritizing getting to it until I got to this readathon, and I'm so glad, again, I'm just so glad that I participated in the Indie Accords Readathon, because I read so many books that I've been putting off, and I love so many of them. With this book, we have a mystery thriller book with a little bit of horror in there as well, following a supernatural investigator, but she's like a vlogger. And I already have a review again for this one that I will include a link to down below, but this was just a really great mystery that had a very cool small town vibe that I always love in my books, and it was really great. Honestly, it felt like it was a traditionally published book that I would see on Book of the Month or something like that, because I do feel like this is widely appealing and very well polished, and I think that it is an excellent thriller. If you love thrillers, I highly recommend reading In the Hills Above the Gristmill. Like I said, it gets a B+ from me. Next is Mary by Nat Cassidy. This is another book that I already have a review for. I really reviewed a lot of books in the month of July, so I'm really happy about that, but I did a joint review of Mary with Carrie by Stephen King, because Mary is inspired by Carrie, and so I thought it'd be kind of fun to read both of those novels within a short period of time and then review them together and kind of analyze their similarities and differences. And so if you're interested in that, please check out the video down below. It's non-spoiler, so you can kind of hear my thoughts on Mary as well as on Stephen King's debut novel. But Mary was really, really good. It has stuck with me a lot as well. There were some things about this book that I didn't enjoy, like it did feel like it was too long, but the main character, Mary, is an unforgettable character. She's absolutely one of my favorite characters of the year, and it's a first-person narrative, and so we get so intensely in her thought process. It was a little bit overwhelming, and I'm glad that I've been able to distance myself from it a little bit, but now that I have, I truly do appreciate what Nat Cassidy was able to pull off in Mary, and I'm so glad that I read it. Mary gets a B+ from me. And the last B+ is a book that I have been thinking about a lot, and I've been debating with myself where to put it. Oh, but I think ultimately I do have to put it in B+, despite the fact that I'll probably get a little bit of flack for it, but it's just how I feel. But the book that I'm talking about is Speaking Bones by Ken Liu. So I really loved a lot of things about this book. I loved some of the characters, really some of the characters. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to reveal who is still alive in the 4th and final volume in this series, but some of the characters really are just some of the best characters ever written. Most complex, most well thought out, most mysterious, where you never really know what they're going to do, but when they do what they're going to do, it makes sense. Those characters in this book are just unbelievable. And for that alone, I would give this 5 stars or put it in the A category. But unfortunately, there are just some things about this book that really let me down. The plot is very well woven together, but the decisions that Ken Liu made frustrated me, and not in a way that I understand why he made that choice, but it still frustrates me just because I care about the world of the characters. Some things are really underused that I thought should have been used more, some characters, some plot elements, things like that. And some elements are overused and it's just drawn out way too long. If you don't know, the 3rd and 4th book of Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty series were originally 1 volume, and if you put that together, it would be 2,000 pages. Or 80 hours almost in audiobook, which is insane. And to be honest, that was not necessary. I know that the world in this series that Ken Liu has created is vast and amazing. It really is. He has done something absolutely incredible with this world. That being said, I think he just really had a good time with it, and he really fleshed out so many different things, and I think that will work really well for a lot of readers, and it did work with me to an extent. But when we're in the final volume of a book, I really like to know as much as is necessary for the world, and maybe add a little bit more to that. But he just kept going and going and going with the world, when I was at a point where I was like, all right, I just need to focus on what is going to happen with these characters, what is going to happen with this story. But this was one of the most meandering, books that I've ever read, to the point where like there was this huge battle, this huge climax kind of in the middle of the book, because like I said, this is part 2 of the final book that was book 3 and 4. So a lot of this book is the climax, but there would be this huge battle scene. It would be like amping up, it'd be really intense, and then all of a sudden you'd get like 2 hours of this backstory to kind of explain what's going on in the battle, and then he would do that again. Like this one battle scene lasted like 20 hours almost. Maybe not 20, but a long time, because he would be in the battle and then he'd be out of the battle, and he'd be in the battle and then he'd be out of the battle, which was really frustrating. Oh man, I don't know. The problem is there was so much about this book that I adored and that I'm so impressed by, and I do think that Ken Liu is one of the most talented and intelligent authors working today, or really ever. He's just an incredible person with an incredible mind, and that is fully on display here. But ultimately, despite the fact that I love the characters, I love the world, and I love so many things about what he did choose to do with the plot, a lot of this book did let me down, and I'm really frustrated by that, and so my frustration is impeding me from giving this an A. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and give Speaking Bones by Ken Liu a B+. I did also just want to say though, if you want to hear more of my spoiler thoughts, I will be doing a live stream with a bunch of amazing booktubers really soon, most likely on August 21st, so keep an eye out for that. But if not then sometime really soon, probably in the month of August. So excited for that. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the A books that I read in the month of July. So the first of those is Black Mouth by Ronald Malfi. So this was my first Ronald Malfi book, and I loved it so much. He is a horror author who is quite prolific, actually. He's written a lot of books, probably around 10 or so, I think, but I didn't actually hear about him until his last book that came out before this one, called Come With Me. But I hadn't read it yet, and I saw Black Mouth for request on NetGalley, and so I decided to go ahead and request it, and once I got approved, I jumped into it, and this book was amazing. It's kind of reminiscent of It in that you have some characters who are now adults coming back to the town where they were children, where something really dark happened in their past, and now they're kind of having to face that old evil again, whether or not it's actually there or it's just in their heads. That's to be determined, but that's kind of the basic setup, but the execution is completely different from It. The characters are completely different, the thing that they're facing is completely different. So much of this diverges from that original idea, but it does take a lot of inspiration from that basic concept, I would say. But I loved this so much. I thought the writing was exquisite. I thought that the characters were really well executed and well-rounded. We have a variety of different perspectives in this book, and all of them are very well fleshed out. This easily could have been like another 200 pages long, but I think that Ronald Malfi did a good thing by keeping it around like that 350-400 page mark, because it felt very sharp and very well executed. I really don't have a lot of complaints about this. Maybe just that some things about the plot were left kind of ambiguous at the end. I personally would have liked a little bit more of an explanation, but overall I love this book so much, and I cannot wait to get to more books by Ronald Malfi. This book gets an A- from me. The second book I wanted to talk to you about in the A category is Lethal White by Robert Galbraith. So this was my reread of book 4 in this Cormoran Strike series, and man, I loved it so much. I don't know what was my favorite book ultimately in my initial read of the series, but Lethal White was amazing. You have a great mystery at the heart of this, but that's not really what I love so much about it. There are just some huge character moments that like had me on the edge of my seat, despite the fact that I knew how things were going to go because I've already read this. There are just some huge character moments and some incredibly impactful things happen in this book, and I was just eating it up, man. I was eating it up like candy. And so I really loved my time with Lethal White, to the point that I jumped into Troubled Blood book 5 immediately after finishing Lethal White, despite the fact that that was not my plan. And I've already finished it, and I loved it so much as well. But I am so glad that I decided to reread this series this year. I didn't plan on it, it just kind of happened, and it was one of the best reading decisions I've made all year because I love this series dearly. Lethal White gets an A from me. Okay, so next we have my second favorite book of the month, which gets an A score from me. That book is Stones of Light by Zach Argyle. This is the second book in the Threadlight series, the first book being Voice of War, and the third and final book being Bonds of Chaos, which does come out this month in August. And yeah, I picked up Stones of Light again for the Indie Accords. I was actually planning on reading it already in the month of July because I am participating in a buddy read with some friends of mine, but I just decided to pick it up for the readathon, and it was incredible. You guys, it really was. I've been reviewing these books on Instagram, and once I finish Bonds of Chaos, because I do have an e-arc of that, I'm gonna go ahead and do a series overview, non-spoiler review of the trilogy on my channel. But Stones of Light took everything that I loved in Voice of War and made it even better. It just really upped the stakes, it upped the character development, it upped the world building. Everything about this was incredible. I think that Zach Argyle has created an incredible series here with some really relatable and emotionally impactful characters with some great relationships. Like, that is like something that I am very much impressed by. Like, the magic system is great, the plot is great, the world is great, but the relationships that Zach Argyle has crafted in this are some of the best that I've read in fantasy, and that's something that I really do appreciate. I also love that these are like epic fantasy, but they're all like 300 pages long. Like, they are not long at all, and that is so refreshing to have that kind of vast world and vast story that I love so much in fantasy, but for it to not take 200 years for me to read for once. And so I really do love that. I cannot recommend this series enough. Stones of Light was fantastic. It gets an A from me. And the last book that I wanted to talk to you about, my favorite book of the month in July, is a book. It's actually the only book that I have a physical copy of, but it is, again, a book that I read for the Indie Accords Readathon. You guys, read more self-pub because there are so many good books out there. But the book that I wanted to talk to you guys about that was my favorite book of July is Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. So originally when I finished this, I think I gave it an A- in my review on Instagram. Guys, I can't stop thinking about this book. It is wild. So this is, how do I even talk about this book? Because I have so many emotions about it. So in this story, we have a main character right here, this little boy right here, and I think his name is actually pronounced Ian, which is kind of funny, but it's spelled E-I-N. And he is on a mission from, I think, like the god of death or something like that, and he has to kill this emperor who is super powerful. But unfortunately, the emperor is obviously super powerful, and this is just a little guy. But he has been given the power to recruit these warriors, but for him to recruit these warriors to his cause, they first have to die, and then he can basically attach their life to his, and so if they try to leave or go too far away from him until he sets them free, they will die for real that time. And so he basically has to get all these people to join him, but for him to do that, he has to make sure that they're killed. So it's kind of a really unique setup that I really enjoyed. But beyond that, you have this incredible world that is built up and all of this lore and all of these legendary characters. Like, they all feel like that. They have these cool, like, legendary names. I think one is called, like, the Whispering Blade, and stuff like that. And I think that is just so cool and so fun to read. But on top of that, despite the fact that, like, you have a great focus on these characters and a great focus on this world, this book is, like, non-stop action. There is so much action in this, and I loved it all. I ate it up. It is so short too. I think it's less than 300 pages. It is. It's like 270 pages, and it's incredible. I loved it so much. The only reason I haven't reviewed this on the channel yet is because I'm actually planning on reading the 2 other main novels in what are called the Mortal Techniques books. So they are 3 standalones that are kind of tied together. Technically, you could read them in any order, but it's definitely recommended to start with Never Die. But I'm going to read the other 2 because I do have them on Audible, and I'm going to review all 3 of them and do kind of like a review and ranking video of all 3 very soon, most likely in September. But guys, this book is incredible. You need to read Rob J. Hayes. If you haven't before, you can actually get all 3 books in the Mortal Techniques on Audible for 1 credit, you guys. That's insane. So I highly recommend you getting that. I highly recommend Never Die. I cannot wait to talk about this more in a review. And yeah, this was my favorite book of the month. So that is it for my July TBR, or my July report card, as it were. Just to kind of recap, I had 3 books that got a C from me in July. I had 9 books that got B and 4 books that got A. So I really, really had a great reading month. I read 16 books, like I said, and none of them fell below that C score, and I really did enjoy so many of the books that I read. A lot of new favorites, a lot of series that I'm excited to continue. I'm satisfied. I'm really, really happy with this. So it was a great month. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite book was that you read in July. If you've read any of these, please let me know if you love them as much as I do, or if you didn't love them as much as I did. Would love to hear from you guys, all of your thoughts and feelings and opinions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.